They called him the man who could buy anything except a smile. I didn't know who Ethan Blackwood was the first time I saw him. If I had, maybe I would have looked away. Maybe I wouldn't have laughed. But life has a strange habit of changing everything with one small mistake. The smell of hot oil clung to my clothes as I stood inside the food truck on the corner of Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street. It was late October. Cold enough to make people walk faster. Cold enough to turn every breath into a cloud. My shift had started at 6 that morning. By 4 in the afternoon, my feet felt like concrete blocks. My manager was in a terrible mood. The lunch rush had been a disaster. And 20 minutes earlier, I'd received an email informing me that I hadn't gotten the marketing assistant job I desperately wanted. Again, I stared at the screen for a full minute before shoving my phone back into my pocket. Rejected. Just like the last 3 applications. 24 years old. Living with a roommate in a tiny Queens apartment. Working a food truck while trying to convince myself things would eventually get better. Some days optimism felt like a full-time job. The line outside had finally disappeared. For the first time all day, I had a moment to breathe. Then a black SUV rolled to the curb. Not unusual by Manhattan standards. Wealthy people appeared everywhere. But this one caught my attention because 3 men stepped out before the passenger door even opened. Suits. Earpieces. Serious expressions. The kind of people who looked like they checked the weather for potential threats. One of them opened the rear door. A man stepped onto the sidewalk. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark charcoal coat. Perfect posture. Everything about him looked expensive without trying. He walked toward the truck while the other men stayed back. Not far. Just far enough to pretend they weren't watching everything. I grabbed a paper tray and forced on my customer service smile. "What can I get you?" The man looked up. Gray eyes. Sharp jawline. Dark hair. Maybe 34. 35. Handsome in the way magazine covers liked. Except there was something strange about him. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying an invisible weight nobody else could see. "Large fries," he said. His voice was calm. Controlled. Efficient. The voice of someone accustomed to being listened to immediately. I nodded and dropped fries into the tray. "Anything else?" "No, that was it." No smile. No small talk. No glance at the menu. Just one-word answers delivered with surgical precision. I handed him the fries. He handed me a 20. Then something caught my eye. A giant digital billboard across the street flashed a business magazine cover. The photo filled the entire screen. The same face. Same eyes. Same expression. Ethan Blackwood. America's youngest billionaire CEO. I looked at the billboard. Then back at him. Then back at the billboard again. The photo and the real man looked almost identical. The only difference was that the real version somehow looked even less happy. Before I could stop myself, I pointed. "Wait." He paused. I pointed toward the billboard. "That's you." One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "Yes." Then I laughed. Not because I wanted to be rude. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Just escaped. A genuine laugh. "Wow." I shook my head. "You really do look like someone stole your puppy." Silence. Complete silence. Even the city seemed to pause. One of the security guys blinked. Another looked horrified. Ethan Blackwood simply stared at me. And for one terrifying second, I wondered if I had just insulted the most powerful customer in New York. But then something happened. Something so small nobody else would have noticed. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Almost invisible. Like winter itself had cracked by a fraction of an inch. And that was the moment everything started to change. I spent the rest of that shift replaying the moment in my head. Not because Ethan Blackwood had been standing 3 feet away from me. Not because he was rich. Honestly, I did not care about billionaires. They lived in a different universe than people like me. What stayed with me was that tiny movement at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. More like a forgotten memory of one. By 7 that evening, the rush finally slowed. The city lights reflected off the glass towers around us, turning Manhattan into a canyon of gold and silver. I was wiping down the counter when my coworker Mia practically slammed her phone onto the prep table. "Sophie, tell me that is not who I think it is." I looked down. The screen showed Ethan Blackwood standing beside a governor at some charity event. Same gray eyes. Same serious expression. That is him, I admitted. He bought fries. Mia stared at me. You sold fries to Ethan Blackwood? Apparently. Do you know how famous he is? I know he looks exhausted. She groaned and threw her hands into the air. You are impossible. The next morning arrived cold and windy. I dragged myself out of bed before sunrise and squeezed onto a crowded subway headed into Manhattan. My roommate Rachel had spent half the night talking about rent increases and job interviews. By the time I reached the truck, I already needed another weekend. The morning rush hit hard. Coffee orders. Breakfast sandwiches. Endless lines of people glued to their phones. Hours disappeared. Around 11:30, I stepped outside to toss a trash bag into the dumpster behind the truck. The wind whipped through the alley between buildings. I pulled my jacket tighter and started back toward the service window. Then I froze. A black SUV sat at the curb. The same one. I recognized it immediately. The rear door opened. Ethan stepped out. For some reason my stomach did a weird little flip. Not romantic. Just surprise. Like spotting a polar bear in a grocery store. He walked toward the truck. Calm. Controlled. Hands in the pockets of a charcoal overcoat. The lunchtime crowd noticed him immediately. People always noticed him. He carried attention the way storms carried rain. I returned to my position behind the counter as he approached. Let me guess, I said. Large fries. For the first time, something almost human flickered across his face. You remember. It was yesterday. Most people forget details. I handed a customer their order before looking back at him. Most customers do not arrive with their own security team. One of the men standing nearby tried very hard not to smile. Ethan glanced toward him. The man instantly became serious again. Large fries, Ethan said. And a coffee. Black. Yes. I started preparing the order. You know, coffee explains a lot. Does it? I was wondering why you looked like you had not slept since the previous administration. For a second I thought I had crossed a line. Then something unexpected happened. A sound escaped him. Quiet. Brief. Barely audible. But it was there. A laugh. Not a full laugh. More like the beginning of one. I nearly dropped the coffee cup. Ethan seemed just as surprised as I was. The silence that followed felt strangely personal. He accepted the order and handed me a $20 bill. Keep the change. That is not happening. I pulled out bills from the register. Your fries cost $7. I can afford it. And I can count. For a moment our eyes met. Gray and blue. Serious and stubborn. Something shifted between us. Not attraction. Not yet. Recognition. Like two people from different worlds discovering they could somehow speak the same language. Ethan accepted the change. Then he looked at me for several seconds before speaking. I will see you tomorrow, Sophie. My name sounded different coming from him. Steadier somehow. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back toward the SUV. I watched the vehicle disappear into traffic. Then I realized something strange. He had come all the way across Manhattan for fries. And neither of us believed that was the real reason. The next morning, I told myself I was not thinking about Ethan Blackwood. Then I spent 20 minutes wondering whether he would show up again. Which technically was thinking about Ethan Blackwood. The realization annoyed me. I arrived at the food truck before sunrise. The air smelled like rain. Gray clouds hung low between the skyscrapers, turning Manhattan into a maze of steel and shadow. By 8 o'clock, the sidewalks were packed. Business people hurried toward office towers with coffee in one hand and phones in the other. Tourists stopped in the middle of crosswalks. Taxi horns echoed through the streets. Normal city chaos. Normal life. Exactly the kind of life that did not include billionaires buying fries 3 days in a row. Around noon, Mia leaned out the service window and nudged my shoulder. Do not look now. Whenever someone says that, I immediately look. Fair point. I followed her gaze. A familiar black SUV had just pulled to the curb. I groaned. You have got to be kidding me. Your mysterious customer is back. He is not my customer. Sure. She grinned. And I am the Queen of England. This time, Ethan arrived without the usual wall of distance around him. The security team remained farther back, close enough to do their jobs, far enough to give him space. He stepped up to the counter. Large fries. I asked. You are becoming predictable. And coffee. Black. You remembered. I remember unusual things. Something about that answer made him pause. For a moment he studied me the way people studied paintings they did not fully understand. What qualifies as unusual? He asked. I handed a customer their order before answering. Billionaire chief executive officers who travel across Manhattan for fries. A faint shadow of amusement appeared in his eyes. Perhaps the fries are exceptional. They are not. Honesty. Also unusual. I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. Felt easy somehow. Natural. Like talking to someone I had known much longer than 72 hours. While I filled his coffee, a little girl walked up beside him holding her mother's hand. She could not have been older than 7. She stared up at Ethan with complete curiosity. Mom, she whispered loudly. That man looks sad. Her mother looked horrified. Emily. Ethan blinked. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing. The little girl continued. Maybe he needs ice cream. The mother looked ready to disappear into the sidewalk. I am so sorry. Ethan looked at the child. Then something incredible happened. Not a smile. Not quite. But his expression softened. Maybe, he said. Maybe I do. The girl nodded seriously, as if she had just solved a major world problem. Then she walked away. I stared at him. That is 2 people in 1 week who think you look sad. I am aware. Have you considered smiling? I have heard rumors about it. People say it is very popular. This time the laugh actually escaped him. Brief. Quiet. Real. The sound seemed to surprise everyone nearby, including Ethan himself. For a second he looked almost younger. Less like the man from magazine covers and more like a normal person standing on a Manhattan sidewalk. Then his phone rang. The change was immediate. His shoulders tightened. The warmth disappeared. He glanced at the screen. Whatever he saw, he did not like it. Everything okay? I asked before I could stop myself. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. The city roared around us. Car horns. Sirens. Footsteps. But somehow the space between us felt strangely still. No, he said quietly. Not really. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, picked up his coffee and walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. For the first time I realized something important. Ethan Blackwood was not lonely because he was powerful. He was lonely because nobody around him treated him like a person anymore. And somehow, without meaning to, I had. The rain started just after lunch. Not a storm. Just one of those slow Manhattan drizzles that turned sidewalks silver and painted reflections across every glass building in sight. Most people hurried past the food truck with their heads down and their collars pulled high. By 3 o'clock, business had slowed enough for me to lean against the counter and stare out at the city. I kept thinking about the look on Ethan's face before he left. Not the serious one. Not the billionaire one. The tired one. The honest one. The expression that had appeared for half a second when he admitted things were not okay. Something about it stayed with me. Maybe because everyone pretended successful people had perfect lives. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to smile when you did not really want to. Around 4, my phone buzzed. Another rejection email. This one from a marketing firm in Brooklyn. I laughed softly and shoved the phone back into my pocket. At that point it almost felt traditional. Rejection had become part of my daily routine. Coffee. Work. Rejection. Repeat. Bad news. Mia asked. Nothing new. You are handling this suspiciously well. I am running out of emotional energy. She nodded thoughtfully. Fair. The afternoon dragged on. Gray skies. Cold air. Endless traffic. Then just before 5 the black SUV appeared again. I stared at it. No way. Mia looked outside. 3 days in a row. This is becoming weird. This became weird yesterday. Ethan stepped out carrying an umbrella. No security visible this time. At least not immediately. He approached the truck while rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. You know, I said as he reached the counter. Most people have favorite restaurants. And you have apparently adopted a food truck. A faint smile threatened to appear before disappearing again. Maybe I enjoy consistency. Maybe you need a hobby. That is possible. I handed him a menu even though I knew he would not use it. Try something different today. Different. Very different. He studied the menu. You are taking this personally. I take menu diversity very seriously. To my surprise, he actually looked through the options. Fine. Fine. You seem determined. I am. Then I will have the grilled chicken sandwich. I raised both hands in victory. Progress. Ethan shook his head slightly. You celebrate strange things. Life is mostly strange things. For a moment he just looked at me. The city blurred behind him. Then, headlights. People rushing home. Yet somehow the conversation felt disconnected from all of it. Quieter. Simpler. Do you always see the world this way? He asked. Which way? Like everything is an opportunity to laugh. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a second. No, my voice softened. I just think life is hard enough already. Something changed in his expression. Not amusement this time. Understanding. Real understanding. The kind that comes from experience. I handed him the sandwich. He accepted it and glanced toward the rain. What happens if you never get the job you want? The question surprised me. Then I keep trying. Just like that. Just like that. I shrugged. Nobody is coming to rescue me. Ethan looked away toward the street. Toward the endless rows of lights and traffic stretching through Manhattan. Sometimes, he said quietly, I think you are stronger than most people I know. Before I could answer, his phone vibrated. The familiar tension returned instantly. The walls went back up. The businessman returned. He looked at the screen and exhaled slowly. Then he slipped the phone away without answering. And for the first time, I wondered what kind of life could make a man ignore a call when it clearly mattered that much. The next day, Ethan did not show up. I told myself that should not matter. Customers came and went. Coffee was poured. Orders were called. Life moved forward. Yet every time a black SUV passed the corner, my eyes drifted toward the street before I could stop them. By 3 in the afternoon, I felt ridiculous. You keep looking outside, Mia said while stacking paper cups. I do not. You absolutely do. Maybe I am checking the weather. She looked up at a perfectly clear sky and laughed. Sure. I rolled my eyes and focused on work. The truth was harder to admit. Somewhere between the fries, the coffee, and the strange conversations, Ethan had become part of my routine. Not because he was famous. Not because he was rich. Because talking to him felt unexpectedly easy. Most people either wanted something from him or feared him. I wanted neither. I just enjoyed reminding him that he was human. Around 5 o'clock my phone buzzed. Rachel had sent a message asking if I could help cover rent a few days early. I stared at the screen and sighed. Money always seemed to disappear faster than it arrived. Another reality of ordinary life. I slipped the phone away and returned to the register. Then, just as the evening crowd began filling the sidewalks, a familiar voice spoke from the other side of the counter. You look troubled. I looked up so quickly I almost dropped a receipt. Ethan stood there. No SV visible. No security nearby. Just Ethan. A dark coat, hands in his pockets, gray eyes watching me carefully. You scared me. That was not my intention. You vanished yesterday. The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyebrow lifted slightly. I was not aware I had established attendance requirements. Heat rushed to my face. That is not what I meant. To my surprise, a faint smile appeared. Not much, just enough to prove he was getting better at it. I had meetings. That sounds serious. It was exhausting. There he is. I pointed at him. That is the face I recognize. Ethan shook his head. You are impossible. That is what everyone says. For several seconds neither of us spoke. The city hummed around us. Taxi horns. Footsteps. Distant sirens. The familiar soundtrack of Manhattan. Then Ethan glanced toward the small folding chair beside the truck. Do you ever sit down? Sometimes. When? Usually after my feet threaten legal action. A genuine laugh escaped him. Clear this time. Real. The sound caught both of us off guard. I stared. Ethan stared back. What? He asked. Nothing. You are staring. I am witnessing a rare wildlife event. He looked away, trying unsuccessfully to hide another smile. Something about that moment felt important. Not dramatic. Not life-changing. Just honest. For the first time since I had met him, Ethan looked relaxed. Not like a billionaire. Not like a chief executive officer carrying the weight of a massive company. Just a man standing on a sidewalk talking to a woman who sold fries. The simplicity of it seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. This time he frowned. Not with stress. With disappointment. You have to go, I said quietly. Ethan nodded. Unfortunately. He slipped the phone away and looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. I will see you tomorrow, Sophie. As he turned toward the street, I watched him disappear into the crowd. And for the first time I realized something dangerous. I was starting to look forward to tomorrow. The next morning arrived bright and cold. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers above Lexington Avenue, turning the entire street into a river of gold. I woke up smiling before I even realized why. The moment I understood, I immediately rolled my eyes at myself. This was ridiculous. Ethan Blackwood was a customer. A very unusual customer. That was all. At least that was what I kept telling myself. During the subway ride into Manhattan, by lunchtime the city was alive with noise. Office workers crowded the sidewalks. Delivery trucks blocked traffic. Steam rose from street vents like ghosts escaping the pavement. The familiar rhythm of New York surrounded me. Yet part of me kept glancing toward the street. Waiting. Around 1 o'clock, Ethan appeared. This time there was no dramatic arrival. No black SUV pulling up beside the curb. He simply emerged from the crowd carrying a paper coffee cup and wearing a dark navy coat. For a moment he looked almost anonymous. Almost. Then people started recognizing him. A businessman slowed down mid-conversation. A woman across the street nudged her friend. Ethan noticed none of it. Or maybe he had simply learned to ignore it. You are late, I said as he approached. One eyebrow lifted. Late. Your lunch schedule has become surprisingly predictable. I was unaware I had one. I keep records. That sounds concerning. I laughed and handed him a menu. What crisis is the company facing today? Several. That sounds healthy. To my surprise, Ethan smiled. Not a half smile. Not a shadow of one. A real smile. Small but unmistakable. It vanished quickly, but I saw it. So did Mia, who nearly dropped a stack of napkins. Ethan noticed my expression. What? Nothing. You are staring again. I think I just witnessed a miracle. He shook his head, though I could tell he was trying not to laugh. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things. Weather. Food. The endless construction projects taking over Manhattan. Nothing important. Yet somehow those conversations became the most important part of my day. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan looked unusually thoughtful. Quieter than normal. His gaze drifted toward the traffic moving past the intersection. Can I ask you something? He said. That depends. On what? Whether it is one of those billionaire trick questions. A faint smile touched his face again. No trick question. Then go ahead. He hesitated. Long enough for me to realize the answer mattered. How do you stay optimistic? The question caught me completely off guard. That is what you want to. No. Yes. I studied him for a moment. The most powerful man I had ever met stood across from me looking genuinely curious. Almost vulnerable. Honestly? I asked. He nodded. Because the alternative sounds exhausting. Ethan looked away. I continued. Life is not perfect. I do not have my dream job. I worry about rent. I get rejected all the time. But bad days eventually end. Good days show up when you least expect them. So I try not to give up before they arrive. Silence settled between us. Not awkward silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that feels heavier because it matters. Ethan stared at the sidewalk for several seconds. Then he said something so quietly I almost missed it. My father used to say something similar. I blinked. It was the first personal thing he had ever shared. The first glimpse behind the walls. Before I could respond, his phone rang. This time he did not answer immediately. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen again. And for the first time since I had met him, it seemed like he was struggling to decide which world he belonged in. The following week changed something between us. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a little more each day. Ethan kept showing up. Sometimes at noon. Sometimes at 1. Occasionally later if meetings ran long. Yet no matter how busy he was, he always appeared. The strange part was that I had stopped being surprised by it. His presence had become as familiar as the traffic outside and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the truck. One chilly Thursday afternoon, I noticed him before he noticed me. He was standing across the street waiting for the light to change. Hands in his coat pockets. Head slightly lowered against the wind. The city rushed around him in every direction, but he somehow looked separate from all of it. Alone in the middle of millions of people. The thought lingered with me long after he reached the counter. "You are staring again," he said. "I am observing. Dangerous. You say that about everything. Because most things are." I handed him his coffee. "Including fries?" "Especially fries." I laughed. "You must be fun at parties." "I do not attend many." The answer came so naturally that I almost missed it. Then I realized he was serious. "Wait." I leaned forward slightly. "You are telling me the most famous chief executive officer in New York does not go to parties?" "I attend events." "That is not the same thing." "No," he admitted quietly. "It is not." Something about his expression made me stop joking. The usual humor faded. For a moment, Ethan looked exhausted again. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone carrying responsibilities that never became lighter. "When was the last time you did something fun?" I asked. He considered the question. Actually considered it. "I do not know." "That is a terrible answer." "It is an honest one." I shook my head. "That might be the saddest thing you have ever said." Ethan looked away toward the street. "You make everything sound simple." "Some things are simple." "Not from where I stand." The wind rattled a nearby newspaper box. A taxi horn echoed down the avenue. I studied him for several seconds before speaking. "You know what I think?" "I am almost afraid to ask." "I think everybody spends so much time treating you like Ethan Blackwood the billionaire that nobody remembers Ethan Blackwood the person." Silence followed. Not because he disagreed. Because he could not. His gaze remained fixed on the traffic moving through the intersection. For the first time since I had met him, I saw genuine sadness behind his eyes. Quiet sadness. The kind that settles in slowly over years. Then his phone buzzed. He ignored it. 5 seconds later it buzzed again. He ignored that too. "Important?" I asked. "Probably." "Should you answer?" Ethan looked at the screen and sighed. Eventually. The phone buzzed a third time. This time he turned it face down on the counter. I stared at him. "Did you just ignore whoever keeps running your empire?" A faint smile appeared. "Perhaps. That feels irresponsible." "You are a bad influence." "I prefer refreshing." To my surprise, Ethan laughed again. A real laugh. Warm and genuine. The sound lasted only a few seconds, but it felt different this time. Easier. Natural. As if he had forgotten how much effort he normally spent holding everything in. Then I noticed something unexpected. 2 women walking past had stopped and were staring. One whispered something to the other while looking directly at Ethan. He noticed it too. The laughter vanished. The walls returned. The distance returned. And for the first time, I realized the outside world was beginning to notice that the coldest man in Manhattan kept coming back to a little food truck on Lexington Avenue. The change happened faster than either of us expected. By the following Monday, people had started noticing patterns. Reporters noticed patterns. Social media noticed patterns. Apparently, when one of the most recognizable business leaders in America visited the same food truck almost every day, eventually someone took a picture. Then someone else took another. Then an article appeared online. Nothing dramatic. Just a photograph of Ethan standing beside the service window holding a paper cup of coffee. The headline was harmless. The internet was not. By lunchtime, Mia was waving her phone in front of my face. Tell me that is not you. I looked down. My stomach dropped. There I was, blurry but recognizable, standing behind the counter while Ethan looked at me like I had just said something ridiculous. Which was probably true. Oh no, I muttered. Oh yes, Mia replied. This is becoming a thing. The rest of the afternoon felt strange. Customers smiled knowingly. A few asked questions. One woman actually ordered fries and then whispered, "Is he really as serious as he looks?" I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the register drawer. Ethan arrived around 1:30. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, I could tell he already knew. You saw it, I said. I saw several versions of it. How bad? One article suggested I am secretly evaluating food trucks as a business acquisition. Please buy this one. You dislike your job that much? No. But if you own it, maybe I can negotiate better hours. To my relief, he laughed. Yet something still seemed off. The smile faded quickly. The tension remained. What happened? I asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the street. A member of my board called this morning. That sounds ominous. They are concerned. About fries. About appearances. I stared at him. You are telling me a room full of executives is worried because you buy lunch from a food truck? Essentially. That might be the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. A small smile appeared despite himself. I thought you might say that. Good. Because it is ridiculous. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us in a blur of motion and sound. Yet the space between us felt strangely separate from everything else. Then Ethan surprised me. They think I am changing. I blinked. And they do not seem to view that positively. Do you? The question lingered between us. Ethan looked down at the coffee cup in his hands. For several seconds he said nothing. The next 3 days felt strangely quiet. Ethan did not appear. No coffee. No conversations. No unexpected laughter. The food truck remained exactly where it had always been, surrounded by the noise and motion of Manhattan. Yet something felt missing. I told myself it did not matter. Then I caught myself looking toward the street every few minutes and realized I was lying. By Friday afternoon, even Mia noticed. You are doing it again. Doing what? Watching the sidewalk like a character in a romantic movie. I am not. You absolutely are. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped because she was right. The worst part was that I had no idea why Ethan had disappeared. Maybe he was busy. Maybe the board meetings had become worse. Maybe the outside attention had finally become too much. Every explanation felt possible. None of them felt good. Around 4 o'clock, dark clouds rolled across the city. Rain began falling in soft waves against the pavement. Customers hurried away carrying umbrellas and paper bags. The streets slowly emptied. We were preparing to close when my phone buzzed. A news alert appeared on the screen. Blackwood Holdings' annual shareholder conference begins tonight. I stared at it for a moment before locking my phone. It was none of my business. Ethan lived in a world of boardrooms and investors. I lived in a world of coffee cups and fry baskets. Those worlds were never supposed to overlap. An hour later, we closed the truck. I pulled on my jacket and stepped into the rain. The city glowed beneath thousands of lights reflecting across wet sidewalks. I had only taken a few steps when a black SUV stopped beside the curb. My heart immediately betrayed me. The rear door opened. Ethan stepped out. Rain dotted his dark coat. His tie was slightly crooked. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely tired. Hi, I said softly. For a second, neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed entirely sure where to begin. Then I noticed something unusual. Ethan was smiling. Not a small smile. Not one of the rare half-smiles I had become used to. A real one. Warm. Relaxed. Human. What happened? I asked. His eyes brightened. I survived the conference. Congratulations. There is more. He looked down briefly before meeting my gaze again. During the presentation, one of the board members mentioned the articles. I groaned. I am sorry. Do not be. His smile widened. They asked why I kept returning to a food truck. And I told them the truth. The rain continued falling around us. Soft. Steady. The city seemed quieter somehow. Which was? I asked. Ethan laughed. The sound was warm enough to chase away the cold evening air. I told them it was the only place in Manhattan where nobody cared who I was. Something tightened in my chest. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply stood there beneath the city lights while rain painted silver patterns across the sidewalk. Then Ethan shook his head slightly. Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me? Unfortunately. You told me I looked miserable. You did. Probably. I laughed. Ethan laughed too. The sound echoed softly through the rain. A few months earlier, the entire city would have considered that impossible. Yet here it was. Simple. Effortless. Real. I looked at him and realized something. The headlines had been wrong from the beginning. This story was never about a billionaire. It was never about a food truck. It was about a man who had forgotten how to smile and a moment of honesty that reminded him he still could. Ethan glanced toward the city skyline glowing beyond the then back at me. Thank you, Sophie. For what? His smile softened. For treating me like a person. And standing there beneath the lights of Manhattan, I finally understood something too. Some people change your life by giving you something. Others change it simply by reminding you who you are.